So for part one of making this rocket, I'm going to show you how to do the red and yellow pieces here, the rocket boosters and the fins. So I'm going to start with creating a new design. And I'm going to start by dragging out a sphere and a hollow box. So I'm going to use this box to cut off the bottom of the circle here. So I'm going to shrink this height down because I don't need to do all of it. I just want to get rid of just a little bit there. And it doesn't really matter how much, you just want to cut off and just make it flat on the bottom. And then I'm going to group everything together. And now you can see I have a flat circle there. And I'm going to position it so it's on the ground, so that that little measurement that's on the right there that says 1 right now and 2, 3, 4 is at 0. So it's right on the ground, nice and flat. So I'm going to do some measurements with this. So if I drag out this ruler, it gives us a little bit more exact measurements. And it doesn't really matter exactly where you put it. If you want to snap it to one of the corners of this, you can. I'm just going to stick it out here. So now you can see there's a whole lot more measurements. So these green ones are telling me how far away from where I dropped the ruler is my shape. And then these blue ones are our actual shape. So I'm going to make these be 15 wide, 15 going back, and 35 tall. And I am in millimeters right now. If you do it in inches, it'll just be ginormous and it might not fit. So I am in the default millimeters right now. All right, so next thing I'm going to do, so this looks basically like one of those red pieces. I'm going to do a technique that's called embossing, which just gives it a little bit more detail. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste or just duplicate. And now if I drag it out, I have 2 of them. And the second one, I'm going to make 1 millimeter smaller on each of those blue measurements. So I'm going to do 14, 14, and 34. And I'm going to make it red just so we can see the difference. So it's just slightly smaller. So now I'm going to put this red one inside of the blue one. So it's right in the center. So I'm going to select both and use the align tools. And I'm going to go in the center and center. And now I can see it's right in the middle. If I look at the bottom, it's centered in there. I'm going to click off. And that'll come into play with what we do with the next step. So we're going to drag out another box and we're going to make it 1 millimeter thick. And the size doesn't super matter for what we're going to do. And I'm going to duplicate this and drag it up so that there is a 1 millimeter gap in between. So if I zoom in here, you can see it's 1 millimeter thick and a 1 millimeter gap. And I'm going to do this a couple of times, and now when it just duplicated right where I wanted it to, I'll do 5. So I have those little boxes all stacked up. So next I'm going to align these with our little pod too. I'm just going to drag it over because it doesn't have to be right in the middle for what we're doing. So I just selected all of them and I can just see that my blue pod is inside of those red stacks. And I'm going to make those red stacks now hollow. And so I still have all of my stacks selected. So like it grabs all of them. So they're all still selected. If I click off and I select all of them, and I'm going to drag it back in here. And I'm going to hold the shift key and click the blue engine pod here. I'm not going to click and drag over it, or what we did with that red inside pod isn't going to work. So I'm going to hold the shift key and select the blue pod. And now I'm going to group it all together. And what you can see here is that by having that red one inside, it has a little like embossing effect where it added a little detail in there because it only cut away with those um, hollow cubes that from the blue part because we only had the blue part selected. So that is our little engine pod there. And if you want, you can group it all together. It's all just going to make it one color. So that's where my red little engine pod is. So that's one of those. So the next step is I'm going to grab in shape generators featured, and there is a shape that on mine I believe is on, oh, nope, I want all, is on the 6th page, this flattened cylinder. So it looks like this thing. If you're looking at the directions, that PDF document that I uploaded, it's a different shape than what he used. That shape he used doesn't exist anymore. So this one, we can get that same look from this. So with this, I'm going to change some settings here. So 10.5, I'm going to increase this flatten direction up to like 70-ish. 10. This one, I'm going to bring it down, or just a tiny bit, 0.2. And then I want 24, 2020. So then with those settings in here that you can see on my sidebar, I'm going to make it 40 long. So I've stretched it out. And I want it to be 20 tall and only 2 thick. So it's this really thin little fin. So 20 tall, 40 wide, 2 thick. And it gives us this little shape, which doesn't look great to me right now. Oh, I know what I did. I want to flip it on its side. And now do 40, 20, and 2. Now that looks a little bit more like a fin. So I have it 40 long, 20 tall, 2 thick. And that gives it that little like bowing out feature. So what I'm going to do now is combine these 2 shapes. So I'm going to select both of them and use the align tool, and I want them next to each other. So now they're in like line with each other. And then I unclicked, and I'm going to choose the yellow one and use the arrow keys on my keyboard just to move it right into that fin pod. And that is one of those 3 pieces for the fins and the engine pod. So now we can just select it all. If you group it, it'll make everything the same color, but it doesn't look as cool with making it into a rocket. So I'm not going to group them. I'm just going to select both and duplicate. So there's that second one. And I'm going to rotate it around 180 degrees. And then I'm going to duplicate it again. and get the third one in and rotate it 90 degrees. And that works for right now. So those are those 3 fins and the engine pod. Part 2 of the video will show you how to make that body of the rocket with the windows and things like that. Um, there you go.